Have you ever noticed that in watch collecting, there's an assumption that if you are a true enthusiast, you will always want another watch? Maybe you've seen it in YouTube videos, maybe you've seen it on forums, maybe you've even felt it. The idea that if you really love watches, you'll keep collecting indefinitely. You'll always have another watch on the wish list, another grail. There's always another acquisition that's right around the corner. But after spending years in this hobby and talking to collectors and watching different collections evolve, and of course, reflecting on my own journey, I've come to a different conclusion. I don't think that most watch enthusiasts actually want to collect watches forever. Now, that probably sounds strange coming from someone who spends a lot of time thinking about watches. And before anyone misunderstands what I'm saying here, I'm not saying that people stop loving watches. I'm not even saying that people lose interest in horology, because I don't think that's the case. I'm not saying collecting is wrong either. But what I am saying is that I think most enthusiasts eventually arrive at a place where acquiring watches stops becoming the primary goal. Now, they still love watches. They still enjoy learning. They enjoy meeting other collectors, going to events. They still appreciate great design, the craftsmanship, the engineering, the history. But the desire to constantly add more watches begins to fade for them. And in today's video, I want to explain why I think that's actually a very normal part of the collecting journey, and why believing otherwise might be one of the biggest lies ever told in watch collecting. The first thing I'd point out is that the watch world naturally creates the impression that collecting should never end. Think about the content that we consume. There are new releases, there are collection updates, there are wish lists, there's top 10 watches. There are the best watches under a certain price point. You can see some of my videos that I've made. The next Rolex, the next Omega, or even the next independent brand, because independents are really in right now. Almost everything in the hobby is focused on acquisition. And that's understandable because acquisitions are exciting. They create stories, they create discussion, there's a buzz, they create some anticipation. But because we're constantly exposed to that type of content, it's easy to start believing that the purpose of being a watch enthusiast is just to keep adding watches forever. And that if you don't have another watch you're chasing, maybe you're losing interest. Maybe you're becoming less passionate. You don't really love the hobby anymore, or maybe you're doing something wrong. And I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I think many collectors misunderstand what's actually happening during the first several years, at least, of their journey. Most people think they're building a collection. What I think they're doing is actually learning. When someone buys their first luxury watch, they usually don't know exactly what they like. They might think they want large watches, and then they discover that they prefer the same watch with smaller proportions. Or maybe they think they love chronographs, as an example, but then they realize they own chronographs and they never use them. Or there might be something in there about brand prestige. It's about a certain brand for them. But as they own different pieces, they discover they actually care more about craftsmanship or finishing or exclusivity or the heritage or design that went into making that watch. Now, every watch teaches something. Every purchase reveals a preference. I've talked about core preferences before. Every mistake you make provides you with information. And when you look at it through that lens, the early years of collecting start to make a lot more sense, because what looks like random buying is often just education. It's part of the process. And what looks like indecision is often just leading to refinement in your collection. So the collection isn't just growing, the collector themselves are evolving. And that's where I think something very interesting starts to happen here. Because eventually, many collectors reach a point where they know themselves much better now than when they started. They know their preferred size, they know the brands that they like, their aesthetics or the complications, even the use cases that they have for them in real day-to-day life. And once that happens, something changes for them. Because not every new release feels exciting anymore. Not every watch that they walk into a boutique and look at feels like somehow it's a temptation, right? Well, maybe I should just get this one. Not every recommendation creates desire in someone. The field kind of starts to narrow a bit, and the watches that genuinely resonate become fewer and fewer and fewer. Now, some people interpret this as boredom. I don't. I think it's clarity. Imagine someone who has spent 10 years learning about wine or photography or cars. And now, if they've spent all that time learning, would we expect them to become less selective over time? No, not at all. You would expect just the opposite. Their tastes would become more refined, more specific, way more intentional. But yet, in watch collecting, many people seem to assume that enthusiasm should just always produce more and more acquisitions. I think that mature enthusiasm often produces just the opposite: greater selectivity of watches. And that's an important distinction, because loving watches and wanting more watches are not necessarily the same thing. Someone can absolutely love watches while buying very few of them. Someone can spend hours reading about watches, discussing watches or movements, appreciating the craftsmanship without feeling the need to constantly acquire new pieces. Those two things are not nearly as connected as many people assume. And in fact, when I look at my own collection, I think that's exactly what I've been experiencing recently. I've talked openly on this channel about some of the changes that I've been making in my collection. I've decided to sell several watches that, objectively speaking, are excellent watches, and I got to spend some time with them this week visiting with a friend of mine. The Grand Seiko SLGA017, right? The Skyflake dial with the Evolution 9 style case, my Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion, even my Ploprof in summer blue. None of those watches failed. None of them disappointed me. None of them suddenly became bad watches, right? The reason that they're leaving is actually much simpler. And that's that I've learned more about what matters to me, and I've learned more about what I enjoy wearing, and I've learned more about the role that I want certain watches to play within my collection. And perhaps most importantly, I have become more certain about what I like and what I want. Now, that's a word that I don't hear discussed very often in watch collecting: certainty. Because for many collectors, the goal isn't actually to own the most watches. The goal is to understand themselves well enough to know which watches matter most to them. Now, for me, one of the clearest examples of that is my Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Enamel. For a long time, it was only receiving occasional wrist time, kind of a once a week wear almost, because I was rotating through a larger collection. But more recently, I've made the decision to wear it far more frequently. We're talking about 4 to 5 days a week. And it's not because it's a new watch. I've owned it for almost 3 years. It's not because I'm chasing another honeymoon period with it. And it's not because someone on the internet told me that I should like it. It's because after years in the hobby, I know exactly what that watch represents to me. And that level of certainty is so incredibly satisfying. Far more satisfying than constantly wondering what comes next, or even having a long list or a short list. I had that for a long time. And there's still watches that I'm interested in, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to go buy them. And honestly, if you're finding yourself at a similar point in your own collecting journey and you want someone to challenge your thinking a bit, feel free to reach out to me. Let's start a conversation, because sometimes having an outside perspective can be surprisingly helpful. So when I hear people talk about the idea that every enthusiast should always be collecting, always adding, always upgrading, I find myself questioning that assumption more and more and more, because I don't think that that's where many collectors ultimately end up. I think what many collectors are really searching for is confidence in their tastes, in their preferences, confidence in the watches that they already own. And once they achieve that, the pressure to constantly acquire often begins to fade away. And again, it's not because the hobby has become less interesting to them, but it's because the collector themselves has become more self-aware. And that brings me to what I believe is the real takeaway from all of this. To me, the goal of watch collecting is not endless collecting. The goal is understanding. Understanding what you value, understanding what excites you and what doesn't, understanding what deserves space in your collection and what may not. Because once you understand those things, something remarkable starts to happen. This is going to sound kind of wild, but collecting becomes optional. You can still buy another watch. Sure, go ahead. You can still chase a grail. You can still evolve your collection, but you will no longer feel compelled to do that. You are making choices because you genuinely want to, not because you believe that's what a watch collector or a watch enthusiast is supposed to do. And for me, that's one of the most rewarding stages of this hobby. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that watch collecting is something you should do indefinitely? Or do you think that most enthusiasts eventually reach a point where they start to become really selective and a lot more settled in what they own? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you for stopping by, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye-bye.